After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the idea of geopolitics as a zero-sum game of winners and losers quickly fell out of fashion. Since then, Western leaders have largely sought to guarantee peace through close, mutually beneficial economic ties with traditional enemies. But has it actually worked out? Well, in the case of Europe and Russia, this doctrine backfired badly. European purchases of Russian energy did not deter Putin from invading Ukraine. Instead, Putin used Europe's reliance on Russian energy as a mechanism of blackmail. However, one major Western power has consistently bucked this philosophy and is finally reaping the benefits of self-sufficiency: France. So how did they do it? France has a long independent streak among America's allies. Charles de Gaulle famously took the country out of NATO, and the country has maintained a uniquely strong nuclear power sector rather than accepting dependence on cheap Russian gas. In recent years, this has helped keep energy prices and inflation under control, while the UK and Germany have slid into recession. Another dimension of the French strategy of self-sufficiency is military production. Among Western countries, the French government is unique in insisting that French weapons are completely homegrown. While Germany, Sweden, Britain, and Italy have significant arms industries, they often incorporate American-made systems. This isn't a one-way exchange either. The American M1 Abrams uses guns designed and manufactured in Germany. This has traditionally left France as something of a maverick. Even if its weapons were as good or better compared to German and American offerings, prospective arms buyers usually preferred the political and diplomatic benefits of partnering with Berlin or Washington. If a state's leaders didn't desire ties with the US or were cautious of being vulnerable to US sanctions, they'd buy Russian weapons. So what changed? From 2009 to 2013, France was the number 5 arms exporter, having lost its traditional number 4 spot to an ascendant China. Russian arms sales were nearly 6 times greater, and it was unimaginable that it could lose the number 2 spot to France, but that's exactly what happened. Every 5 years, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or SIPRI, publishes a report, Trends in International Arms Transfers. According to the last 3 editions, French arms sales have more than doubled in the past decade, while Russian arms exports have fallen by 60%. The rise of France and the fall of Russia has been happening slowly before our eyes for the past decade, and the diplomatic and economic fallout of the Ukraine war suddenly finalized the process. And what a difference a decade can make. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the new Russian Federation inherited the overwhelming majority of the USSR's famous, or rather infamous, weapons industry. It retained the ability to produce already prolific weapons systems like the AK assault rifle line, the T-series tanks, Sukhoi and MiG fighters, and various types of ships. While the war in Ukraine has exposed serious flaws in some of these systems, buying Soviet and Russian weapons was nonetheless a complete, affordable alternative to buying weapons with strings attached from the United States. During the crisis years of the 1990s, the Russian government experienced severe revenue shortfalls, and the arms industry survived largely thanks to the continued demand for Soviet legacy systems. As late as 2008, analysts with the Russian think tank CAST, the Center for Analysis of Strategies and Technologies, observed that the nation with the largest numbers of the best Russian tanks wasn't Russia at all, but was in fact India. However, the Russian arms industry was rapidly approaching a new peak in weapons development, domestic acquisitions, and exports. So how did they turn it around? Rising revenues from oil and natural gas, together with Vladimir Putin's ambitions in Eastern Europe, marked an increase in domestic arms purchases during the next decade. Russia reaped most of the benefits of growing weapons demand, particularly with increased sales to China and India. From 2009 to 2013, Russia supplied 52 states with weapons and led the world in tank and ship sales. SIPRI estimates that Russia's most important category of major weapons sales was aircraft, which accounted for 43% of all exports. In 2009, CAST estimates that sales of all aerospace equipment constituted 60% of Russian military exports. Russia accounted for 27% of the global weapons exports from 2009 to 2013. At the same time, the US only commanded 29% of global arms sales, and it seemed possible Russia might become the leading arms exporter. Meanwhile, France was far behind either of those two titans. French weapons accounted for just 5% of global arms exported in this period. But that was all about to change. France had a world-class weapons industry and was no stranger to foreign partnerships, as it had partnered with the United Arab Emirates to fund the development and manufacture of the excellent Leclerc main battle tank. However, France struggled to find a large arms export market. Arms procurement is a political and diplomatic process, and European leaders generally prefer buying American or German weapons, while Russia dominated Oceania and Asia. Fast forward a decade, and Russian arms sales are at an all-time low. Total Russian arms sales tumbled by 17% from 2013 to 18 compared to the previous 4-year period, and have since collapsed by 53%. While Putin's Russia has been burning bridges and drawing international condemnation in the run-up to the war in Ukraine, Emmanuel Macron has been building relationships and promoting French weapons in a persistent charm offensive. Together with rising doubts about the quality of Russian weapons and the reliability of Russian arms sales, France's Dassault Rafale multi-role fighter has been on the attack against Russia. Not on the battlefield, mind you, but in Russia's most important arms market. While Russia sold weapons to more than 50 states in 2009 to 13 and over 30 before Ukraine war sanctions set in, the Russian arms export market has always been remarkably centralized. India has been the largest arms importer for the majority of the last 12 years, and until recently, it purchased more than 50% of its weapons from Russia. When Russian arms sales peaked, India was by far its biggest customer. Not only was India buying the most arms in the world, but from 2009 to 13, it purchased 75% of its weapons from Russia. The next largest buyer of Russian weapons is China. While China had developed a fairly impressive arms industry by this time, it still relied on Russia for various systems and types of equipment. Next up was Algeria. While it was a much smaller customer than China, Russia virtually monopolized Algerian arms purchases. These 3 states single-handedly accounted for 60% of all Russian arms sales, and similar customers like Venezuela weren't far behind. So what happened? 2 major changes set in during the span of 2014 to 18 that caused Russia to lose 17% of its sales. For one, Venezuela's hyperinflationary spiral and economic collapse had set in, and Venezuela halted virtually all Venezuelan arms imports. More seriously, Russia faced its first challenges in the Indian market. Throughout the 2014 to 18 period, India continued to import the majority of weapons from Russia. However, Russia's share dropped from 75% to 58%, as the Indian government took tentative steps toward diversification, with relatively small purchases from Israel, the United States, and France. China continued to make 70% or more of its arms purchases from Russia, but China was also buying fewer weapons as it increasingly replaced imports with domestic systems. Not only did Russia's traditional markets shrink, but Russia failed to capitalize on growing demand during this period. Saudi Arabia briefly displaced India as the #1 arms importer worldwide, and Egypt also became one of the world's leading importers. Russia had virtually no presence in Saudi arms purchases, and Egypt only sourced 30% of its arms from Russia, opting for the French Rafale over Russian aircraft. This made France the largest supplier of Egyptian weapons, leaving Russia in second place. Demand for arms was on the rise, but total Russian sales shrunk. Not only did the volume of Russian arms sales fall by 17%, but they had lost a quarter of their share of the global market. Meanwhile, sales of the Dassault Rafale had single-handedly increased France's share of the global arms market by about 30%. Despite these developments, Russia's position as #2 arms exporter still seemed unassailable. Russian arms exports had 3 times the value of French exports, with 21% of the global market against France's 6.8% share. But things were about to get worse for Russia. Much worse. And from 2019 to 23, demand for Russian arms began imploding on multiple fronts. China's demand for imported weapons fell by 44%, which included a more than 30% drop in Russian arms exports to China. Algerian arms demand also collapsed, taking approximately 10% of all Russian arms sales with it, while Egyptian purchases of Russian weapons fell by 33%. While these were bad developments, the worst for the Russian arms industry was yet to come. While Russia once accounted for over 75% of Indian arms purchases, it only accounted for 36% in 2019 to 23. And who has gained where Russia has lost? Well, most of Russia's lost market share has gone to France, whose sale of Rafale fighters and Scorpene submarines accounted for 33% of arms purchases, nearly displacing Russia as India's #1 source of weapons. And things are only getting worse for Russia. Diplomatic fallout from the Ukraine war and the economic effects of COVID have resulted in numerous smaller partners deserting Russia too. Of the 31 states buying Russian arms in 2019, only 12 made any purchases in 2023. But Russia may struggle to maintain even this demand due to shortages of supply. Serbia, a virtual satellite of Russia, has gone elsewhere after being scorned by war-related Russian failures to deliver aircraft on time. Russia is trying to turn things around though, and has increased its production of many systems at rates beyond what Western analysts thought was possible. The Russian arms industry now employs 3.5 million Russians and accounts for 20% of all Russian manufacturing. However, Russian losses on the battlefield still consistently outweigh production, so they're having to employ desperate measures to keep up. Since the start of the war, Russia has been forced to pull mothballed systems out of storage to maintain its strength in the field. It's redirected materiel earmarked for export to the war, and it's had to source drones and artillery ammunition from states such as Iran and North Korea. Whether Russia wins or loses in Ukraine, it's unclear how it will maintain this arms industry with so few customers, nor does it seem they can downsize it without causing an economic depression. And to make things even worse for Russia, this complete collapse of their arms industry has coincided with the rise of another. France has always been a significant player in the global arms market, but lacked large, long-term relationships. Just look at the M1 Abrams and Leopard 2. The US and Germany have produced thousands of these tanks, and numerous countries around the world operate them. There are less than 900 examples of France's own third-generation main battle tank, the Leclerc. Despite being the newest of the designs, production lasted only 17 years, and of the less than 900 units built, 388 went to the United Arab Emirates. Despite exporting major arms to 69 countries between 2009 and 2013, France possessed just 5% of the global market share. One of the largest sources of arms revenue at this time was simply the royalty payments France received from China, which licensed the production of French helicopters at the time. However, a pivotal moment occurred as India placed orders for 49 Mirage 2005 combat aircraft and 6 Scorpene submarines, while also expressing interest in buying up to 126 Dassault Rafale Omni-Role fighters. This was a hint at where the future of French arms sales lay, and the beginning of an extremely fruitful relationship. Between 2009 and 2018, France's arms industry saw a remarkable 261% increase in sales to the Middle East, the highest growth rate for any state's sales to the region during this period. The primary reason for this rapid growth was France's emergence as the main supplier of Egyptian arms, including an order of 52 Rafale jets, of which 24 were delivered by the end of 2018. At the same time, many states were moving away from Russian imports. Huge demand emerged for the French Rafale, and from 2019 to 23, it became one of the most in-demand planes in the world. In Europe, Greece and Croatia each placed orders for Rafales, while Serbia, a traditional ally of Russia, saw purchases of French aircraft to replace its Russian jets and transport planes. But while France struggled to compete with the US in the European market, it found 90.9% of its sales elsewhere. The bulk of France's arms exports during this time were directed towards Asia and Oceania, and in the Middle East during this time, France exported 94 Rafales, which accounted for 31% of the value of French arms exports. Demand shows no signs of slowing too, as there are outstanding orders for almost 200 more Rafales. But why is the Rafale so popular with customer nations? There are several reasons. As a 4.5 generation fighter, it balances the advantages and disadvantages of an older airframe like the F-15 and the 5th generation F-35. While not a stealth aircraft in the same sense as the F-35, the Rafale incorporates several design elements aimed at reducing its radar cross-section and enhancing its survivability in contested airspace. The Ukraine war has demonstrated that traditional 4th generation fighters can struggle to survive in the face of modern air defenses, which makes the Rafale an appealing and practical upgrade. However, the most important factors behind choosing one plane or the other are political. While the F-35 remains the most in-demand fighter in the world, with more than 1,000 having been produced and total orders being close to 3,000, those who have placed orders for F-35s have found themselves waiting, while France has been able to expedite sales by transferring Rafales directly from the French Air Force to customers. Additionally, the US is quite protective of the plane. Turkey was supposed to have access to it but was removed from the program after buying Russian S-400 air defense systems. Likewise, the logistics and internal systems of the F-35 are dependent on the continuous support of the United States. An export unit of the F-35 costs up to $130 million, and an hour of flight will cost an estimated $40,000. If a state's actions move too far away from the US, their entire investment goes up in smoke. While this is fine for close allies with shared goals, it's a problem for those with a desire to explore an independent foreign policy. Take India, for example. While the state leaders have increasingly diversified away from dependence on Russia, it refused to condemn the invasion of Ukraine and ignored Western sanctions to continue buying Russian oil at a steep discount. This stance is common in the new arms market France has found in the Middle East, North Africa, and East Asia. French weapons rely almost exclusively on homegrown systems, while many European weapons use American systems that will be vulnerable to sanctions. With heavy wartime losses restricting Russia's ability to fill orders and the collapse of demand for Russian weapons, France is uniquely positioned to absorb even more of Russia's abandoned market share. So that's the current state of things, but how does the future look for both the French and Russian arms industries? Who will win and who will lose in the global arms market? It appears that the French arms industry is poised for continued growth, buoyed by several promising developments. Deepening ties with India and the Serbian government's insistence on buying the Rafale point to the appeal French weapons hold for states traditionally friendly with France. While demand for the Rafale remains strong in the near future, there are other potential game changers in the French arms market. France is a likely partner to develop India's future-ready combat vehicle, a near-future program aiming to replace India's aging T-72s and troubled Arjun main battle tank. India's familiarity with Russia's lighter-weight, autoloader-based tanks and their requirement that the tank be under 60 tons would make a modernized Leclerc a natural fit. Other Western tanks like the Leopard 2, Challenger 2, and Abrams weigh 62 to 72 tons, while different versions of the Leclerc weigh 54 to 58 tons. The Ukraine war has demonstrated that Western tanks have fantastic survivability and crew protection, but has also shown that their weight can be a tactical problem in muddy terrain and underdeveloped areas. On the other hand, Russia has experienced high tank losses in the Ukraine war. Penetrating shots frequently cause a catastrophic kill, blowing the turret into the air and killing the whole crew. France is unique among potential partners in that they have experience building tanks that fit India's desired specifications, and avoiding the Ukraine war has prevented any reputational damage to the tank. But while Leclercs have avoided the real crucible of the Ukraine war, they've seen significant service in the Yemeni civil war. While the war there has produced numerous pictures of wrecked Saudi Arab Abrams tanks, Emirati Leclercs have yet to experience a single loss. Realistically, the Leclerc and Abrams have fairly similar capabilities and protection. The most likely explanation for the difference in performance is that the Emiratis have used better tactics. Nonetheless, the Leclerc is the only major tank in the world today that still holds an unblemished record. With its low weight and thriving Franco-Indian cooperation, it could easily form the blueprint for new development under India's future-ready combat vehicle program. The program also requires that India produce at least 50% of the components of the tank domestically. The existence of an Indian-French production line would cut costs, increase availability, and make the product of any French-Indian collaboration an attractive import. This is just one example of how France is not just stepping onto the world stage as an arms manufacturer, but posing a serious challenge in Russia's most important markets. It's easy to think that France upset Russia as the number 2 arms exporter overnight, or that its rise was a direct diplomatic consequence of the Ukraine war. But the truth is that this did not happen overnight. The process of France replacing Russia in some of its key markets, India moving away from dependence on Russia, and China moving towards self-sufficiency have all been at least a decade in the making and do not appear to be reversing course. France's unique ability to offer a third way to customers who want Western quality without vulnerability to American arms sanctions is a fundamental and increasingly successful challenge to at least half of the Russian arms industry's export model. Russia's future as an arms producer will have to rely on the other half of their export model, producing cheap weapons. But even on this front, Russia may find itself facing stiff competition from Franco-Indian collaborations and will certainly struggle to compete with the rising Chinese arms industry. Ironically, the past customers who kept Russia's arms industry alive after the collapse of the Soviet Union will be Russia's fiercest future competitors. But what do you think of France's rise as an arms exporter? What will it mean for the future of warfare? Let us know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.